Hey, gang. Stanley Morgan Jr. leads the Huskers in all-time receiving yards. Who leads them in all-time receiving touchdowns?
You are Locked On Huskers, your daily podcast on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, gang, DP here, Locked On Huskers. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. Greatly appreciate you for hanging out with us. If you have not subscribed, please do so. Click the button, get the content on a regular basis. We want to thank the folks from Built Bar. Rico, tell them about Built Bar.
Thanks, DP. Are you guys looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and the calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar on the market, Built. Now, if you're like me, you work out from time to time, you need something to eat after you work out that's really tasty and really healthy, then you guys need to get these Built bars. They also have Built Puffs. They're healthy, like I said, and they taste fantastic. Seriously, they're so good, you won't even know that they're good for you. What makes them so good? They've got 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I don't know how they do it, but they taste like a candy bar while also being good for you. Now, if you want to find them, you don't just have to go to Built.com. You can go to Walmart or Sam's Club, and they have all these amazing specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right, you go to your nearest Walmart, walk all the way to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of Built bars. And if you want a lot more, go to Sam's Club. Grab yourself the big old 13-bar box with all the hit flavors, Brownie Batter Puff and Churro Puff. You'll thank me later. Back to you, DP.
Thank you, Rico. Greatly appreciate it. Great stuff. Thank you, Built Bar, for what you do, and the folks at Locked On Sports Network. We appreciate you allowing us to bring this content down. Again, hit the subscribe button so you get the content. It helps us, and it helps with the sharing of this information. So if you subscribe, the greater the numbers. And I'm told how great Nebraska is at helping its own. This is a great way to do that today. I wanted to have a conversation about the pass catchers at the University of Nebraska, and in particular, the receivers. We will do an entire show on tight ends, the tight ends that play at Nebraska, and there's one All-American who's played tight end at Nebraska, and that's its own discussion, but still getting to the level is great. And there have been some great tight ends at Nebraska, and we'll talk about them in future episodes. But in this one, the first thing that pops to mind is Nebraska's reputation when it comes to wide receivers. What the reputation was based on how the foundation of a blue chip program is built. And this specific one was built on having receivers who are committed to being less selfish and spending most of their time blocking and chipping linebackers and getting downhill on corners and safeties, and sometimes getting amongst the bigs and shielding somebody. That's far more prevalent in the description of Nebraska receivers for the bulk of Nebraska's history. So as we go through the list of the best, so if you're going to do a Mount Rushmore of Nebraska pass catching wide receivers, and there's some names that come to mind, but then you have to get into the corners of what it means to be a receiver at the University of Nebraska, what was asked of you and what was required. And there's some great players, recent history that that if Trey Palmer has a second year at Nebraska, he's in the conversation. There are receivers that came and went. There are receivers who had big moments in Nebraska history, big receiving touchdowns, and some of the great legendary calls for Nebraska football are pass catchers and plays made, big time situations, etc. Now, for most of the championship years, there's a very specific style of play. There is a receiver that comes to mind for both of those exceptional runs for Nebraska. The first run, the 70-71 run, 72, very detailed and specific on the passing game at Nebraska and who it centered around. And I think that if you're having the discussion, you start with 1970. Then you have to get into the late 70s, the David Hum, Vince Ferragamo throw the ball around, get into the Turner Gill and the triplets, get into Tommy Frazier, and then getting into the gunslinger era of Nebraska football, where there's some quarterbacks that put up some just gaudy numbers from throwing the ball around. But then you have to measure. Remember the measurement stick that we're using in determining the greatest and the best is to say how much better were these receivers than all of the other receivers who were playing college football at the time. And you can literally say for two of them that they were the elite pass catcher in the country. And you wouldn't get much lean back from it. The list isn't that long, first of all, of receivers at Nebraska who have attained All-America status, whether it be consensus or unanimous. That's a short list. But then you have to get into, okay, if you didn't have the moments of greatness, if you didn't have the team moments of greatness, if you didn't win a national title, were you competitive in the conference? And depending on the conference and depending on the opponents at the time, different levels of success for different levels of skill. You have to measure by that. And the iconic stature of Johnny the Jet Rodgers, no matter whether you put him as a wingback, halfback, flanker, receiver, football player. That's football player. But one of the elite pass catchers in Nebraska history. And the numbers jump quite a bit. And you think about the style of play in the era. This was not the pass happy days of 1970 and 71. That didn't really exist. And for Johnny Rodgers to do what he did in that era is pretty impressive. As a matter of fact, it's super impressive. To look through the Big 8 records at the time, and to see the numbers that Johnny put up, and then the Heisman Trophy Award. Yeah. Let's be clear. Johnny Rodgers sitting at number 3 all time right now. Right now. At 2,679 yards. Number one. There's no player in Nebraska football history had more touchdown catches than Johnny Rodgers. He set the record back in the day. It's 50 years later, and it still hasn't been done. It still hasn't been done. Let's not even throw away the fact that he had 152 rushes in his career. Add 14 rushing touchdowns to the 27 pass catches for touchdown. Jet, what were you doing? Jet was just he was a cheat code. And then especially when you measure him, and this is an era of some great running backs, that Johnny was so much better than that was an era of running back where the game was built around it. So yeah, we're going to have this discussion by setting the standard that winning national championships, winning Heisman trophies, setting all-time records that still exist, and being versatile in it, while being the elite player at your position and in college football. Johnny Rodgers is the iconic image and standard of receiving at Nebraska. So much so that 50 years later, those numbers have not been topped or barely matched, even in an era where the ball is thrown around with a higher level of frequency and need. We'll put a pin there. We'll come back to it. I want to talk about the leading receiver by yardage. Man, there's a story behind that too. We'll be right back. Hey gang, DP here, Locked On Huskers. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers the first watch and listen each and every day. Your Huskers, every day. That's what we're here for. That's what we try to do. And again, I'm not here trying to give you all the answers to the questions. I'm trying to get to the right question. in this particular case, is Nebraska a receiver university? Is that the consideration? I mean, and look, there are some receivers that we can talk about. Abdul Muhammad, in any other time scheme system, has crazy numbers. There are tons of receivers who could have put up numbers, but who conceded those numbers to be a part of national championship teams and national championship programs. There are tons of players who came to Nebraska to play receiver who made concessions for the greater good. That is a statement of truth. Lots to talk about. But as we talk about the numbers, and this is about the numbers. This episode is about the numbers. The leading receiver by numbers for the career is Stanley Morgan Jr. Now, his numbers are great all the way across. Now, I can tell you, and I'll ask you this, how many receivers have had 20 or more touchdowns receiving while at Nebraska? How many receivers, and who are they? How many receivers? I just gave you one in Johnny the Jet Rodgers. How many receivers had 20 or more catches in their career at the University of Nebraska, and who were they? Number 2 on that list. Also number 1 in receiving yards. Also number 1 in receptions. 189 catches from 2015 to 2018. Averaging 14 yards a carry, 14 and a half yards of reception, 22 touchdowns. Listen, Stanley Morgan, I always thought that he got everything out of what was available to him. I thought that, there were times when he was leaned on when I thought, okay, you were asking too much. You're asking him as the feature receiver to kind of go through and take some of the pounding. But the production and the efficiency matter. And 189 catches over a career. Look, those are numbers. That number resonates no matter what program you're in the country. It doesn't matter. There's another number. There's another person that's involved in this thing. To say that there are 6 Nebraska Huskers, 6, who in their career had over 2,000 yards receiving. 6. I gave you Stanley Morgan Jr. I gave you Johnny Rodgers. There are 6. To say that I'm slightly surprised, but I shouldn't be. Jordan Westerkamp had 2,474 yards receiving in his career, 18 touchdowns. Didn't hit that magical 20 number that we were talking about, but 18. 167 catches, which is 4th all time. Woof. Woof. You have to say that out loud to give Jordan Westerkamp his due. Give the man his flowers. That's pretty impressive. And again, being targets and having that additional pressure and all the things in play, and the big moments, right? To have those big moments which lead to more big games, which lead to more big moments. Westerkamp, bravo. Immediately 3 catches come to mind. You go, okay. But to think that there were 167 catches in the course of that. Another receiver over 2,000, 2005 to 2008, Nate Swift. Nate Swift with 166 catches over the course of that. 1 behind Westerkamp, but he had 2 more yards. So Westerkamp, there was one route, man, we could have just gone upfield, not run out of bounds, and you'd be ahead of Nate Swift. But I don't think it matters because both are exceptional. If you said they're both top 5, nobody argues. Nobody argues. If you say they're both top 5, nobody argues. except, we'll have a thing to talk about later. We'll have that one because the numbers tell whatever story you want it to tell. That's the beauty and the pain of basing conversations just on stats rather than achievement with those stats, accomplishments with the stats, because that matters. Currently, we're talking about stats that numbers 5 and 6 on the all-time receiving list in yards in the career. Nate Swift with 24.76, Westerkamp with 24.74. Then at 4 in receiving yards, J.D. Spillman also puts him at number 3 in receptions. 3. 170 catches in his career. That only follows Kenny Bell and Stanley Morgan. Those are the only two. Kenny Bell with 181 catches for 2,689 yards. And remember, I asked the question, how many Nebraska receivers had over 20 touchdown catches in their career? I asked the question, how many receivers had over 2,000 rushing in their career? And then to ask the question, how many receivers had over 150 receptions in their career? There are all of those receivers that we just mentioned. Stanley Morgan, Kenny Bell, Johnny Rodgers, J.D. Spillman, Nate Swift, and Jordan Westerkamp, all with over 150 catches, all over 2,000 yards receiving, but only 4 had over 20 touchdown passes caught as Huskers. At 21, Kenny Bell. At 22 each, Stanley Morgan, Nate Swift. 27 with Johnny Rodgers. And we'll put a pin there, but I need to say this. I just gave you 6 candidates for the Mount Rushmore for receivers. I'm not sure any of them the first ones that get into the room. We'll talk about that guy when we come back to Locked On Huskers. Hey, gang, welcome back. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers a part of your day. Huskers all day, every day. We do that for you here at Locked On Huskers. We appreciate you hanging out. Again, if you have not subscribed, please do so. Click the button and get this content. Share it. Let folks know. And if you have comments for this list, this conversation, where you think this list, where the players belong, or did I miss somebody? And there's tons of receivers to talk about. I mean, listen, there've been some numbers, right? There've been some guys. Let's go through a couple. So Terrence Nunn had 136 catches, 115 for Quincy Enunwa, 135 for Marlon Lucky, but he also had 515 carries. So DeMornay Pearsonell, that if we talked about what could have been, what should have been, there's some numbers along this thing. There's some players in the room. There's some great conversation. Brandon Riley, surprising that he had 70 catches, 1,200 yards. The 6 touchdowns is about right, but I'm surprised to be in that space. And then Matt Davidson in his career from 97 to 2000 with 93 catches, 6 of them for touchdown at 15-7 a pop. But, when you walk into the elite space, right, you walk into like a VIP club, there's 2 doors that open. And Johnny Rodgers is opening door number 1. He's opening door number 1. Johnny doesn't care if he gets there first, but they're going to open the door together. And he needs a partner. He needs somebody that was of his level and of his style and of his elite level. And as good as Stanley Morgan Jr., Kenny Bell, J.D. Spillman, Nate Swift, Jordan Westerkamp are, there's somebody that gets in the room. As a matter of fact, they have a lifetime membership in the room, and they're one of the first 2 to walk in the door. 1980 to 1983, one of the most incredible offensive groups put together. The triplets with Turner Gill at quarterback, Mike Rozier at running back, and Irving Fryer at receiver. And this is why I say when you compare players at the same position, you have to be considerate of the era that they played in and how good were they compared to all the other receivers in their era. And listen, don't forget that even with the numbers of passes caught, Irving Fryer still was in a running offense that, hey, he had to block, bro. He had to put body on. Like, he had to do that. But I'm not sure that anybody would say that if you needed a pass caught by any receiver that's ever played at Nebraska, that Irving Fryer isn't the name that comes up. Again, give Johnny his flowers. I hopefully pay tribute to Johnny Rodgers in this, in his 154 catches, over 2,600 yards receiving, 27 touchdowns in the air, 14 on the ground. But Irving Fryer's numbers, while only 67 catches, 11 touchdowns. Also, let's count, he carried the ball 52 times for 600 yards at 11.5 yards a pop and 5 touchdowns. So he would take that reverse and make it happen. But I think Rodgers and Fryer sit on top of the mountain, and they welcome in anybody else that you want to choose from the people we've talked about. There are some great receivers who made great concession and were selfless in their play and took fewer catches to play in more successful games for better teams and for national championships. But Rodgers and Fryer are the gentlemen who opened the door to the receiver elite room. Appropriately so. Nothing given, everything earned. I hope that you've had a fantastic Memorial Day. I hope you have an incredible day, an incredible week ahead of you. We'll close out this episode with the 3 words we love so much. Go Big Red.